take over the guests and the entire party like this is my wedding and you've completely overstepped your bounds.
I've planned over 300 weddings. And I can tell you this. The guest list is never just a list. It's a map of power. It's who gets seen, who gets erased, and who gets to decide. This is the story of a bride who thought she was planning her wedding. She wasn't. She was watching her identity get rewritten, one name at a time, by a mother-in-law who understood something most people don't. Control doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be consistent. By the time the invitations went out, half of the bride's family wasn't on them, and the bride, she didn't even know yet. I'm Emily Carter. I've seen mothers smile while they destroy. I've watched brides lose their voices in rooms full of people who claim to love them, and I've learned that the most dangerous weddings aren't the ones that explode. They're the ones that slowly, quietly, erase you. This is one of those weddings. Hey, I'm Emily, and if you're here, you already know that weddings reveal everything. The control, the money, the boundaries that should have been set years ago. I've been a wedding planner for over a decade, and I'm here to walk you through the patterns most people miss until it's too late. If you want to see how power works behind the veil, hit that subscribe button, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's get into it. Her name was Sarah, 29, graphic designer, the kind of person who sent thank you notes by hand and remembered your coffee order. She'd been with Daniel for 4 years. They met at a mutual friend's birthday party. One of those nights where you're not expecting anything, and then suddenly you're talking to someone until 3 a.m. about nothing and everything. Daniel proposed on a Tuesday. No flash mob, no viral moment. Just the two of them on the couch they'd picked out together at IKEA, with her favorite takeout and a ring he'd been carrying around for 2 weeks waiting for the right moment. She told me later that's when she knew, not because of the ring, because he couldn't wait for some perfect choreographed scene. He just wanted to start their life. The wedding was set for May. Small venue, about 120 guests. Nothing extravagant, but everything intentional. Sarah had a Pinterest board she'd been quietly building for years. Soft greenery, string lights, long tables instead of rounds, because she wanted it to feel like a dinner party, not a production. She'd saved for 3 years, not because Daniel couldn't contribute, he did, but Sarah wanted to walk into her wedding knowing that every detail, every choice was something she'd built, not inherited, not handed to her built. I met Sarah 6 months before the wedding. She came into our first meeting with a binder, color-coded tabs, vendor quotes printed and highlighted, budget broken down by category. I remember thinking, this is someone who does her homework. This is someone who knows what she wants. And in my line of work, that's either the easiest client or the hardest, depending on one factor: the mother-in-law. Sarah's family was small. Her mom passed when she was 19. Cancer. Sudden, brutal, the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare. Her dad remarried a few years later. Nice woman, but not her mom. Sarah had 1 brother, 2 cousins she was close to, and a small circle of friends who'd become family over the years, tight-knit, real. When she talked about her guest list, I could hear the weight in her voice. These weren't just names. These were the people who showed up when her mom died, who sat with her dad in hospital waiting rooms, who made sure she ate, slept, kept going. Daniel's family was different, larger, louder. His mother, Catherine, came from what she liked to call old Charleston money. I'm not sure how old, but old enough that she mentioned it in every conversation. She wore pearls, like punctuation. She had opinions on fonts, on florals, on the difference between eggshell and ivory, and why one was appropriate and the other was not. The first time I met Catherine was at a venue walkthrough. Sarah had already chosen the space, a restored barn about 30 minutes outside the city. Exposed beams, floor-to-ceiling windows, this beautiful natural light that made everything look like a painting. It was Sarah. Warm, understated, personal. Catherine walked in, looked around for about 40 seconds, and said, "Well, it's very rustic," the way she said rustic. like she was describing a health code violation. Sarah smiled. That tight, polite smile I've seen 1,000 times. The one that says, I'm going to keep the peace, even though you just insulted something I love. Daniel didn't say anything. He was looking at his phone. Catherine walked the perimeter, heels clicking on the hardwood, and then she stopped in the middle of the room, turned to me, and said, Emily, I'm sure you've worked with a lot of different tastes, but I do think it's important that a wedding reflects both families, don't you? I said what I always say. Absolutely. That's why we start with what the couple envisions, and then we build from there. She smiled. But it wasn't a smile that agreed. It was a smile that said, we'll see. The first sign was subtle. Catherine wanted to be copied on all vendor emails. Not just the major ones, all of them. Florist updates, linen confirmations, catering tastings. Sarah thought it was helpful. She told me she's just excited. She wants to be involved. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was involvement and control looked the same at first. 2 weeks later, Sarah forwarded me an email. It was from Catherine to the florist. A complete redesign of the centerpieces. Taller arrangements. White roses instead of the garden mix Sarah had chosen. A request to swap out the greenery for something more structured. Sarah's message to me was 3 words. Is this normal? I called her. I didn't want to text this. I said, it's not abnormal for mothers to have opinions. But she's not the client. You are. Do you want these changes? There was a pause, long enough that I could hear her breathing. Then she said, I don't know. Maybe she's right. She's done this before. I haven't. That's the line, right there. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a small boundary issue. Because Sarah wasn't asking if she liked the changes. She was asking if her own taste was legitimate. I said, Sarah, you've been planning this for 6 months. You know what you like. If you want to incorporate her ideas, great. But don't change your vision because you're afraid your vision isn't good enough. She thanked me. We kept the original centerpieces, but the seed was planted. And I could already see it growing. The guest list became the battlefield. And like most battles with women like Catherine, it started with generosity. 3 months before the wedding, Catherine invited Sarah and Daniel to lunch. One of those restaurants where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiters refill your water before you've taken 2 sips. Sarah told me about it the next day. She said Catherine had been warm, affectionate, even asked about the planning, said everything sounded lovely, and then, halfway through the main course, made her offer, I'd like to contribute to the wedding. Sarah's exact words to me were, I didn't know what to say. I just froze. Catherine told them she wanted to help with the venue cost. Not all of it, just enough to take the pressure off. She said she knew how stressful budgets could be and that she simply wanted them to enjoy their day without worry. She even said, this isn't about control, it's about love. When someone says it's not about control, it's always about control. Daniel was thrilled. He hugged his mother right there in the restaurant. Sarah smiled and said, thank you. But later, when she called me, I could hear something else in her voice. Not gratitude, uncertainty. I asked her, did she mention any conditions? Sarah said no. But then she paused and added, she did say she'd love to help finalize the guest list since she knows so many people who'd want to celebrate with us. There it was. I've seen this before. The gift that isn't a gift. The generosity that comes with invisible strings. You don't see them at first. You just feel them tighten. A week later, Sarah sent me the updated guest list. It had grown. 120 names became 160. Then 180. Catherine had added cousins Sarah had never met. Daniel's father's business associates, friends of the family from the country club, people whose last names Sarah had to Google. I ran the numbers. With the additional guests, we were over capacity for the cocktail hour layout. The catering cost jumped by nearly $4,000. The rental order for chairs, linens, glassware, all of it had to be recalculated. I sent Sarah a revised budget breakdown. I didn't editorialize, I just showed her the numbers. She called me an hour later. Her voice was tight. Catherine said she'd covered the extra costs. She said it's not a problem. I asked the question I always ask. But is this what you want? Silence. Then quietly, I don't know anymore. Here's what most people don't understand about this kind of control. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as care, as tradition, as someone older and wiser, smoothing out the hard parts so you don't have to worry. But every time Catherine added a name, she was erasing one of Sarah's, not literally, not at first, but socially, visually, emotionally. When you walk into a wedding with 180 people and only 30 of them are yours, you're not the bride anymore. You're a guest at someone else's event. Sarah's brother called her 2 weeks later. He'd heard through a cousin that the wedding was getting bigger. He asked, jokingly, if he was still invited or if he needed a country club membership. Sarah laughed it off. But after she hung up, she sat in her car for 20 minutes. She told me this later. She said, I realized I hadn't looked at the list in days. I didn't even know who half these people were. And I was scared to ask. Catherine started attending vendor meetings. Not all of them, just enough to establish presence. She'd arrive early, chat with the florist, the caterer, the photographer. She had this way of talking that made everything sound like a collaboration. Sarah and I were thinking, we've decided, the family prefers, Sarah was standing right there. But Catherine's voice was louder. At the final cake tasting, Catherine suggested they go with a more traditional design, 5 tiers instead of 3. Classic white fondant instead of the buttercream Sarah wanted. She said, I just think it photographs better, and you'll want this to look timeless. Sarah looked at Daniel. He shrugged. It does sound more formal. The baker looked at me, then at Sarah. I said, whose name is on the contract? Catherine's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. Sarah said, softly, mine. I nodded. Then, it's your call. There was a pause, the kind that makes a room feel smaller. Catherine laughed, a light, performative laugh. Of course it is. I'm just offering my opinion. I've been to quite a few weddings, that's all. Sarah ordered the 5-tier cake. 2 months before the wedding, I got a call from the venue coordinator. She was confused. Someone named Catherine had emailed asking to adjust the seating chart. She'd requested access to the floor plan and wanted to move a few tables to accommodate the family section. I called Sarah immediately. She didn't know. Catherine hadn't mentioned it. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then, very quietly, she said, Emily, I don't think my dad's table is even on the chart anymore. That's when I realized this wasn't just about adding names, it was about rearranging the architecture. Catherine wasn't trying to join Sarah's wedding, she was trying to replace it. The thing about control is that it doesn't stay sharp, it becomes routine. And once it's routine, it stops feeling like a violation. It just feels like the way things are. Sarah stopped calling me with questions. She started forwarding me decisions that had already been made. Catherine thought we should do assigned seating instead of open. Catherine found a better deal on the linens. Catherine talked to the DJ about the playlist. I'd reply with the same question every time. Is this what you want? And Sarah would say, it's fine. It's easier this way. Easier. That word started showing up a lot. Easier to let Catherine handle it. Easier to agree. Easier to stop fighting over details that maybe didn't matter anyway. But they did matter. Because every time Sarah said it's fine, she was making herself smaller. 6 weeks before the wedding, Sarah's cousin Emma called me. I don't usually take calls from guests, but Emma had been at several planning meetings. She was one of Sarah's bridesmaids. She wanted to know if I'd seen the updated invitation list. I hadn't. I told her the invitations had gone out 2 weeks earlier. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my mom didn't get one. Sarah's aunt, her mother's sister. One of the people who took care of Sarah after her mom died. I checked the final mailing list. Emma's mom wasn't on it. Neither were 3 of Sarah's college friends. Or her dad's brother. Or 2 of her co-workers who'd been on the original list Sarah handed me 6 months ago. I counted 14 names. 14 people Sarah had chosen who never received an invitation. I called Sarah. She was at work. I could hear the noise of an office in the background, people talking, phones ringing. I said, "We need to talk about the guest list." She said, "I know. Catherine said we were over capacity, so we had to cut a few people." She helped me figure out who I interrupted. I don't usually do that, but I did. "Sarah, did you see the final list before it went out?" Pause. I thought I did. Catherine sent me a draft, but I was slammed with a work deadline, and she said she'd handle the final edits. Why? Is something wrong? I didn't answer right away. Because I was trying to figure out how to say this without making her feel like I was blaming her, but also without protecting her from the reality of what had just happened. I said, "Your aunt didn't get an invitation." The background noise on her end got quieter, like she'd walked into a hallway or a stairwell. "What? Neither did Emma's mom, or Josh from your design team, or your dad's brother. 14 people, Sarah. 14 people from your original list didn't get invited." She didn't say anything, but I could hear her breathing. Then, very quietly, "How did that happen?" I could have said a lot of things. I could have said it happened because she gave someone else the pen, because she trusted authority over her own instincts, because she was tired and overwhelmed and thought delegation was the same as partnership. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, "Catherine made the cuts." Sarah tried to fix it. She called her aunt, apologized, said there had been a mix-up with the invitations. She overnighted new invites to the people who'd been cut. But the damage was done. Not just logistically, emotionally. Her aunt was gracious, said she understood. Weddings are complicated, no hard feelings. But Sarah told me later that when they hung up, she sat on her bathroom floor and cried for 30 minutes. She said, "I didn't even fight for her. I didn't even notice she was gone." The rehearsal dinner was the next fracture. Catherine had offered to host it, another generous gift. She chose the restaurant, a private room at the same place where she'd made her initial offer to contribute. The guest list for the dinner was supposed to be immediate family, and the wedding party 20 people, maybe 20. Sarah got the seating chart 2 days before, 43 names. Catherine had invited extended family, Daniel's godparents, her book club, the president of the Garden Society. Sarah's dad was at a table in the back corner, near the kitchen doors. I wasn't at the dinner, but Sarah's brother was. He texted me a photo of the place cards. One table, front and center, had Catherine's name, Daniel's name, and 6 of Catherine's friends. Sarah was at a side table with her bridesmaids. Her brother's text said, "Is this normal?" I didn't respond. Because no, it wasn't normal. But by that point, I wasn't sure Sarah knew what normal was anymore. The week before the wedding, Sarah came to my office. She didn't have an appointment. She just showed up. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The kind that lives in your shoulders, your jaw, the way you hold your mouth when you think no one's watching. She sat down and said, "I don't think I want to do this anymore." I asked if she meant the wedding or the marriage. She said, "I don't know." We sat there for a while. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't tell her everything would be fine or that it's normal to feel stressed before a wedding. Because this wasn't stress. This was erosion. Finally, she said, "I feel like I'm disappearing." I asked what she meant. She said, "I walk into rooms and people ask Catherine questions about my wedding, my flowers, my cake, and I just stand there. And I don't even know when I stopped correcting them." I asked if Daniel had noticed. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Daniel thinks his mom is being helpful. He keeps saying how lucky we are, that she cares so much." I leaned forward. I said, "Sarah, luck doesn't make you feel invisible." She looked at me. And for the first time in weeks, I saw something shift. Not anger, not resolve, just awareness. Like she'd been living in a dark room and someone finally turned on a dim light. She said, "What do I do?" I said, "You decide what you're willing to lose." The discovery happened 3 days before the wedding, and it wasn't dramatic. It was an email. Sarah was going through her inbox, looking for the final headcount confirmation from the caterer. She'd been copied on hundreds of emails over the last few months, most of them vendor threads with updates, invoices, minor adjustments. She usually skimmed them, but this one she opened by accident. It was dated 5 weeks earlier. Subject line, "Guest list final. Please confirm." It was from Catherine to the venue coordinator. Sarah had never seen it before. The email was polite, professional, exactly the kind of message you'd send if you were the person in charge. Catherine had attached a spreadsheet. A complete guest list with seating assignments, meal preferences, and a column labeled Family Priority. Sarah opened the attachment. Her hands were shaking when she called me. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Emily, I need you to look at something." I told her to send it over. 30 seconds later, it was in my inbox. I opened the spreadsheet. It took me less than a minute to see what Sarah had seen. Catherine had color-coded the entire guest list. Blue for Daniel's family and friends. Green for family, friends, and associates. Yellow for extended network. And red. Red for Brideside Limited. There were 12 names highlighted in red. 12. Out of 183 guests. Sarah's dad, her brother, her 2 cousins, the bridesmaids, Emma's mom, who Catherine had added back after Sarah called her in a panic, a few college friends, and 1 coworker. 12. I scrolled to the seating chart tab. Every single red name was placed at the back of the room, near the service entrance, far from the head table, far from the dance floor, far from anywhere a photographer would naturally shoot. But that wasn't the worst part. There was a notes column on the right side of the spreadsheet. Most cells were empty, but a few had comments. Next to Sarah's dad's name, Catherine had written "seat near exit, minimal interaction." Next to Emma's mom, "low priority, late ad." Next to Sarah's coworker, "non-essential, non-essential." Sarah's voice on the phone was flat, hollow, she said. She called my people non-essential. I asked Sarah if she'd confronted Catherine yet. She said no. She said she didn't even know how. What do you say to someone who's been smiling at you for 6 months while systematically erasing you? I told her to sit with it for an hour. Not to react. Not yet. Because once you react, you can't take it back. And in my experience, women like Catherine are very good at flipping the narrative. Very good at making you look hysterical, ungrateful, unreasonable. Sarah said, "I don't even know if Daniel will believe me." That's the part that broke my heart. Not that Catherine had done this, but that Sarah wasn't sure her own fiancé would take her side. She forwarded the email to Daniel with a single line, "Did you know about this?" He didn't respond for 2 hours. When he finally called her, he sounded defensive. He said his mom had just been trying to help. That she was organized, that someone needed to manage the logistics. That Sarah had been so busy with work, she'd asked for help. Sarah said, "I didn't ask her to rank my family by importance." Daniel went quiet. Then he said, "She probably didn't mean it like that." Sarah told me later that's when she knew. Not that Daniel was a bad person, but that he'd been living inside his mother's logic for so long, he couldn't see it anymore. To him, Catherine's authority was just the way things worked. It wasn't control, it was structure. And if Sarah pushed back, she wasn't protecting herself. She was disrupting the structure. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment with the spreadsheet open on her laptop. She went through every name, every note, every color-coded cell, and she realized something. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't Catherine being overly involved or a little pushy or trying to help in a clumsy way. This was intentional. This was architectural. Catherine had built a wedding where Sarah was a supporting character, The guest list wasn't balanced, it was designed. Daniel's family and Catherine's social circle took up 70% of the room. Sarah's people were placed where they wouldn't be seen, wouldn't be heard, wouldn't register in the photos or the memory of the day. Catherine had even adjusted the processional. Sarah found another email, this one to the coordinator, requesting that the groom's family entrance be extended to allow for appropriate recognition of the maternal line. The maternal line. Catherine wanted a longer spotlight during the processional, more time, more visibility, more control over the symbolic moment when family is presented and acknowledged. Sarah looked at the seating chart again. Her father was seated 12 tables away from the head table. Catherine was 3 feet to the left of Daniel. Sarah's dad would be eating dinner next to people he'd never met, while Catherine sat in the center of the room holding court. There was one more detail Sarah found, buried in another vendor thread. An email Catherine had sent to the photographer. Please prioritize family formals with the groom's side. Minimal time needed for bride's family small group. Quick shots will suffice. Minimal time, quick shots. Sarah closed her laptop. She sat in the dark for a long time. And then she picked up her phone and called me. She said, I need to fix this. I said, okay, how? She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was different, calmer, clearer. She said, I'm going to rewrite the seating chart. Sarah didn't tell Daniel what she was doing. She didn't call Catherine. She didn't send a group text or schedule a family meeting. She just started moving pieces. The morning after she found the spreadsheet, she called the venue coordinator directly. She apologized for the confusion, said there had been some miscommunication, and that she needed to submit a revised seating chart. The coordinator asked if Catherine had approved the changes. Sarah said, very calmly, I'm the bride. I'm approving them. There was a pause on the other end. Then the coordinator said, understood. Send it over. Sarah spent the next 4 hours rebuilding the chart. She didn't do it out of anger. She wasn't trying to punish anyone. She was just putting her family back in the room. Her dad's table moved to the front. Right side, 3rd row, where he could see her, where she could see him. Her brother, her cousins, Emma's mom, her college friends, all of them relocated to tables near the center. Not because she wanted to erase Daniel's family, but because her people deserved to exist in the same space, with the same visibility, the same respect. She sent the new chart to the venue. Then she sent a copy to me with a single sentence. This is what it should have been. She didn't stop there. Sarah emailed the photographer. She said she wanted to adjust the timeline. 30 minutes for family sides, equal time for both sides. She included a shot list, her dad walking her down the aisle, her brother's toast, her and her bridesmaids getting ready. Moments Catherine had quietly minimized or removed. The photographer responded within an hour. Absolutely, I'll make sure we get everything. Sarah called the florist. She reinstated her original centerpiece design, the garden mix, the soft, unstructured greenery she'd chosen 6 months ago. She said she appreciated Catherine's input, but she was going back to her vision. The florist didn't ask questions. She just said, I still have your original mock-ups. We'll make it happen. One by one, Sarah reclaimed her wedding. Not loudly. Not with speeches or ultimatums. Just with quiet, deliberate corrections. She didn't announce what she was doing, because she'd learned something in the last 6 months. Announcements invite negotiation, and this wasn't up for negotiation. 2 days before the wedding, Catherine called her. Sarah told me about the conversation later. She said Catherine's tone was light, friendly, like nothing had changed. Catherine said, darling, I just got off the phone with the venue, and they mentioned you'd made some updates to the seating chart. I thought we'd finalized that weeks ago. Sarah was at her kitchen counter. She had her laptop open in front of her, the new seating chart on the screen. She looked at her dad's name in the 3rd row and she said, very evenly, we did. But I realized some of my family had been placed too far back. So I moved them. Catherine laughed. That same polite, slightly condescending laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, the back tables are perfectly lovely, and we needed the front sections for Daniel's extended family. You understand?" Sarah took a breath. Not because she was afraid, but because she was choosing her words. She said, "Catherine, I do understand, but this is my wedding, and my family is going to be where I can see them." There was silence on the other end. Not long, maybe 3 seconds. But it was the kind of silence that recalibrates a relationship. Catherine's voice, when it came back, was cooler. "Well, I suppose it's your choice, though I do think it disrupts the flow we'd worked so hard to create." Sarah said, "I appreciate everything you've done, but the flow is going to look a little different now." Catherine tried once more. She said, "I just don't want you to regret changing things at the last minute. These decisions were made for a reason." And Sarah, for the first time in 6 months, didn't apologize. She didn't soften. She didn't say, "You're probably right," or "I'll think about it." She just said, "I know, and I'm changing them anyway." Daniel found out that night, not from Sarah, from his mother. Catherine called him upset. She said Sarah was being difficult, that she'd undone weeks of planning, that she was making emotional decisions and it was going to ruin the aesthetic, the flow, the entire vision they'd worked so hard to build. Daniel came home frustrated. He asked Sarah why she hadn't talked to him first, why she'd gone behind his mother's back, why she was making things complicated so close to the wedding. Sarah didn't yell. She didn't cry. She pulled up the spreadsheet on her laptop and turned it toward him. She said, "Read the notes column." He looked confused. She pointed to her dad's name. "Read it." He read it. "Seat near exit, minimal interaction." She scrolled down. "Read this one, non-essential." She let him sit with it. She didn't explain. She didn't defend. She just let him see it. After a long moment, he said quietly, "I didn't know she wrote that." Sarah said, "I know." He looked at her. She was just trying to help. And Sarah, very calmly said, "Daniel, she labeled my family non-essential at my wedding. That's not help. That's erasure." He didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, Sarah called me. She sounded different. Not lighter, exactly, but solid. Like she'd found the floor again after months of freefall. She said, "I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if Catherine's going to cause a scene. I don't know if Daniel's going to stand with me or stand with her. But I know one thing." I asked what. She said, "I'm not going to walk into my wedding and feel like a guest." The wedding day started quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like held breath. Sarah got ready in the bridal suite with her bridesmaids. Hair, makeup, the small rituals that are supposed to feel joyful, but I could see it in her face. She was waiting for the moment Catherine would realize what had changed. I was coordinating with the venue staff, doing final checks on the seating chart, the florals, the timeline. Everything Sarah had reinstated was in place. Her centerpieces, her family positioned where they belonged. The photographer had the updated shot list. Catherine arrived an hour before the ceremony. She walked into the venue in a cream-colored dress, not white, but close enough that 3 guests did a double take. She had her usual entourage, 2 of her friends from the Garden Society, Daniel's aunt, and a cousin who apparently managed events for a living and loved to remind people of that fact. She did her rounds, greeted guests, smiled, hugged. She was radiant, magnetic, the kind of woman who makes a room reorganize itself around her presence. And then she saw the seating chart. I was standing near the entrance when it happened. I watched her stop in front of the display board. She tilted her head slightly, the way you do when you're reading something that doesn't match what you expected. She scanned the table assignments. Once, twice. Her friend leaned in and said something I couldn't hear. Catherine's smile didn't move, but her jaw tightened. She turned, looked around the room, and found me. She walked over. Slowly, deliberately. Her heels clicked on the hardwood like punctuation marks. She said, very quietly, "Emily, there's been a mistake with the seating chart." I said, "No mistake. Sarah updated it earlier this week." Catherine's smile sharpened. I'm sure she did. But we'd already finalized the arrangements. This disrupts the entire flow. I kept my voice even, professional. Sarah felt her family needed to be repositioned. It's her wedding, so we made the changes. Catherine leaned in slightly, not aggressive, just close enough that her words felt private. I paid for a significant portion of this event. I think that earns me some input on how it's organized. There it was. The leverage, the thing that had been sitting under every conversation, every decision, every quiet compromise for 6 months. I looked at her. I didn't blink. I said, contributions don't buy seating charts, they're gifts. And gifts don't come with voting rights. Her expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes did. She said, I see. Then she turned and walked toward the bridal suite. I texted Sarah immediately. Catherine's on her way to you. Sarah texted back. I know. 2 minutes later, I heard voices in the hallway. Not yelling, but sharp. Controlled. The kind of anger that doesn't need volume. I moved closer. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was protecting my client. Catherine's voice came through the door, calm but cold. Sarah, darling, I just saw the seating chart. I think there's been some confusion. Sarah's voice was quieter, but steady. There's no confusion. I moved some tables. You moved your father to the front? Yes. That section was reserved for our side of the family. There was a pause. Then Sarah said, our side. Catherine adjusted. Daniel's side. You know what I mean? I do know what you mean. That's why I changed it. Another pause. Longer this time. Catherine tried a different angle. Softer. Sweetheart, I understand you're emotional. It's a big day. But these decisions were made carefully. There's a reason we structured things the way we did. Sarah's voice didn't waver. The reason was to make my family invisible. I read the notes. Catherine, I saw the spreadsheet. Silence. Then Catherine said, slowly, I don't know what you think you saw, but I was simply trying to organize a complex event. If you misinterpreted, I didn't misinterpret. You labeled my people non-essential. The air in the hallway changed. Even through the door, I could feel it. Catherine's voice dropped. Not in volume, in temperature. You're being very ungrateful. And Sarah said, I'm being very clear. There was a long silence. Then the door opened. Catherine stepped out, her face composed, her smile back in place. She saw me standing there. She didn't say anything. She just walked past, heels clicking, back toward the main hall. I waited a moment, then knocked softly and stepped into the bridal suite. Sarah was sitting on the small couch by the window. Her makeup was perfect. Her dress was perfect, but her hands were shaking. I sat down next to her. I didn't ask if she was okay. She wasn't, but she was something more important than okay. She was sure. She said, she's going to make this difficult, isn't she? I said, maybe. But you're not changing the seating chart. She looked at me. No. I'm not. The ceremony started on time. Daniel stood at the altar, his best man beside him. The music began. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle. And then Sarah, her father, walked her down. Slowly, proudly. I watched from the side. I watched him squeeze her hand before he let her go. I watched the way Sarah's face softened when she saw him tearing up, and I watched Catherine, seated in the front row, her face perfectly neutral. The ceremony was beautiful. Sarah and Daniel exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Personal, honest, full of promises about partnership and respect and choosing each other every day. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the room erupted in applause. Sarah and Daniel walked back down the aisle together. And as they passed, I saw Sarah's eyes find her father's table. He was smiling, so was her brother, her cousins, Emma's mom. They were close enough to be seen, close enough to matter. The reception started smooth. Cocktail hour, guests mingling, the room buzzing with that particular energy weddings have when everything is working. Catherine held court near the bar. She was gracious, warm, the perfect mother of the groom. She told stories, laughed at jokes, posed for photos. But I noticed something. Every time someone asked where Sarah's family was seated, Catherine's smile tightened just slightly. Dinner began. The tables filled, and when Sarah and Daniel entered the reception hall, I watched Catherine's face as she registered the new layout. Sarah's father, front and center, her brother at the table beside him. Her people, visible, celebrated, exactly where they should have been from the start. Catherine didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The toasts began. Daniel's best man went first. Funny, heartfelt, the crowd loved it. Then Sarah's brother stood up. He talked about losing their mom, about how Sarah had held the family together, about how their dad had walked into every school event, every birthday, every milestone alone, but never let them feel the absence. He said, "Today, seeing my dad walk Sarah down that aisle, seeing him at the table right here, where he can actually be part of this, it reminded me that family isn't about status or size or who knows who. It's about showing up. And Dad, you've been showing up for us our whole lives." The room was silent. Then it erupted. Applause, tears, people standing. I looked at Catherine. She was clapping, but her face was stone. After dinner, Daniel pulled Sarah aside. I saw them near the edge of the dance floor. He said something. She shook her head. He said something else, more urgently. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something back, short, definitive. Daniel's face fell, but he nodded. Later, Sarah told me what he'd said. He'd asked her to go apologize to his mother, to smooth things over, to acknowledge that maybe she'd been too harsh, too reactive, too emotional about the seating chart. And Sarah had said, no, just that, no. Daniel said, "She's hurt." And Sarah said, "So was I for 6 months. And you didn't ask her to apologize." The shift happened during the parent dances. Traditionally, the bride dances with her father first, then the groom dances with his mother. It's scripted, predictable, one of those moments everyone expects. But Catherine had requested something different weeks ago. She'd asked the DJ to introduce both dances simultaneously, father-daughter and mother-son at the same time. She'd said it was more efficient, more modern, kept the energy moving. Sarah had agreed back then, because back then, she was still saying yes to everything. But 2 days ago, when Sarah updated the timeline with the DJ, she'd changed it back. Father-daughter first. Alone, spotlighted, the DJ made the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the dance floor, Sarah and her father." The opening notes of the song filled the room, not the song Catherine had suggested. The one Sarah had chosen. The one her mother used to hum when Sarah was young. Sarah and her father stepped onto the floor. Just the two of them. The room went quiet in that particular way it does when something feels sacred. I watched Sarah's face. She wasn't performing. She wasn't smiling for the photographer or playing the role of perfect bride. She was just there, with her dad. In a moment that belonged to them. Her father said something. I couldn't hear it. But Sarah laughed. A real laugh. The kind that makes your shoulders shake. And when the song ended, the applause was thunderous. Sarah hugged her father, held on for an extra beat. Then she stepped back, and the DJ transitioned into the next song. And now, Daniel and his mother, Catherine. Catherine stood, she smoothed her dress, checked her hair, and walked to the dance floor. Daniel met her there. The music started, a classical piece, elegant, controlled. They danced. Catherine smiled. She said something to Daniel, and he nodded. From a distance, it looked perfect, picture perfect. But I was watching Catherine's eyes. And I saw the moment she understood. She'd been repositioned, not removed, not punished, just moved from first to second. It was a small thing, tiny even. But in the language of weddings, in the language of power and visibility and symbolic hierarchy, it was everything. Catherine had spent 6 months engineering a wedding where she was centered. And in one quiet edit, Sarah had reclaimed the narrative. After the dance, Catherine returned to her table. Her friends leaned in, said something. She smiled, waved it off. But her champagne glass stayed full for the rest of the night. The evening continued. Cake cutting, bouquet toss, dancing, everything you'd expect, but the room had shifted. It was subtle. The kind of thing most guests wouldn't notice, but the people who mattered did. Sarah's family stayed late. Her dad danced with her 3 more times. Her brother gave an impromptu second toast that had half the room crying. Her cousins took over the dance floor and turned the reception into something loose and joyful and completely unscripted. Catherine left early, not dramatically. She didn't storm out or make a scene. She just quietly gathered her things, said her goodbyes, and slipped out during a slow song. Daniel noticed. He looked toward the door. Then back at Sarah, she was dancing with her bridesmaids, laughing. Free. He didn't go after his mother. The photographer caught everything. Not because Sarah had asked him to, but because moments like that, real moments, are what good photographers look for. There's a shot from later in the night, Sarah sitting at her table, shoes off, dress slightly wrinkled, talking to her dad. He's leaning in, saying something, and she's smiling, not the posed, practiced smile from earlier. The unguarded one. In the background, you can see the seating chart. Her father's name in the 3rd row, visible, present, exactly where it should be. That photo ended up in the album, not on the first page, but close. The reception ended just after midnight. Guests filtered out. The venue staff started breaking down tables. I stayed to oversee the final details, make sure nothing was forgotten. Sarah found me near the exit, still in her dress, holding her shoes, hair starting to fall out of its pins. She said, "Thank you," I said. "You did this, not me." She shook her head. "You told me I could." We stood there for a moment. The room was mostly empty now. Just the echoes of music and laughter and a night that had belonged, finally, to her. She said, "I keep thinking about that spreadsheet, the one where she labeled my family non-essential." I waited, she said. I almost let that be the truth. I almost walked into my own wedding believing that my people didn't matter as much as hers, that their presence was negotiable. I said, "But you didn't." She looked back at the empty dance floor. "No, I didn't." A week later, I got a call from Daniel. He asked if we could meet for coffee, not about a wedding. Just to talk. We met at a place near my office. He looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from realizing something you should have seen months ago. He said, "I didn't understand what my mother was doing. Or maybe I did and I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't say anything." He needed to say this, not hear my response, he continued. Sarah showed me the emails. All of them. The spreadsheet, the notes, the seating chart my mom submitted. I read the word non-essential next to Sarah's aunt's name and I felt sick. He looked down at his coffee. I told myself my mom was just being helpful. That she was organized, that she knew how weddings worked. But she wasn't helping. She was rewriting Sarah's life. I asked how Sarah was doing. He said, "Better than me, honestly." She's relieved. I think she spent so long trying to make everyone happy that she forgot she was allowed to just exist. I asked if Catherine had reached out. He nodded. She called yesterday. She said she felt disrespected, that Sarah had embarrassed her in front of the family. That we'd ruined the flow of the wedding she'd worked so hard to create. "What did you say?" He was quiet for a moment. I told her it wasn't her wedding to create. That conversation marked something. I don't know if Daniel and Catherine repaired their relationship. I don't know if they set new boundaries or if things went back to the way they were. That wasn't my job to track. But I do know this. Sarah sent me a photo 3 months later. Her and Daniel at their kitchen table, laughing, normal. Building a life that looked like theirs, not like someone else's blueprint, the caption said. "Thank you for reminding me I was allowed to take up space. I've been thinking about that spreadsheet a lot since Sarah's wedding. The color-coded cells, the notes column, the clinical efficiency of it all. Because here's the thing most people miss. Catherine didn't wake up one day and decide to erase Sarah. She didn't sit down with a checklist titled, "How to Destroy My Son's Fiancé." She just did what she'd always done. She organized, she structured, she applied her logic, her taste, her understanding of how things should be. And in her world, that structure had always worked. It had always been correct. The problem wasn't that Catherine was uniquely evil. The problem was that no one had ever told her no. Not effectively, not in a way that held, and by the time Sarah found her voice, half the wedding had already been rewritten. I think about the moment Sarah called me after finding that spreadsheet. The flatness in her voice when she said she called my people non-essential. That word, non-essential, it's a business term, a budget term. The kind of language you use when you're cutting costs or streamlining operations. It's not supposed to apply to human beings. It's definitely not supposed to apply to family, but that's how Catherine saw it. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. In her world, there were people who mattered to the social architecture of the event, and people who didn't. And Sarah's family, in Catherine's assessment, didn't. They weren't influential, they weren't connected, they didn't add value to the image Catherine was building, so they were expendable. What Sarah did wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. She didn't humiliate Catherine. She didn't ban her from the wedding or make a scene or turn the reception into a public trial. She just moved some tables. She put her father in the 3rd row instead of the 12th. She gave her family the same visibility, the same priority, the same respect that Daniel's family had, and that somehow felt radical, because in Catherine's world, equality looked like rebellion. I've planned a lot of weddings where the mother-in-law oversteps. Most of them don't end the way Sarah's did. Most of them end with the bride apologizing, or compromising, or quietly accepting that this is just how it is, how it's always been, how it's going to be. Because fighting feels harder than surrendering. And by the time you realize you've surrendered too much, you're standing at an altar in a dress someone else chose, surrounded by people you've never met, wondering how you got here. Sarah got close, very close, but she stopped. She looked at that spreadsheet and she made a choice, not a loud choice, not a dramatic one, just a clear one. The thing about control is that it relies on compliance. It needs you to keep saying yes, to keep deferring, to keep believing that someone else's authority is more legitimate than your own. The moment you stop complying, the structure falls apart. Catherine spent 6 months building a wedding in her image, and Sarah dismantled it in 72 hours. Not with a wrecking ball, just with a seating chart and a conversation that ended with the word no. No, my family is not going in the back of. No, I'm not changing my centerpieces. No, I'm not apologizing for taking up space at my own wedding. That's all it took. One boundary. Held. I don't know what happened with Sarah and Catherine after the wedding. I don't know if they repaired things or if they maintain a polite, distant relationship where nobody talks about the seating chart. I do know that Sarah didn't regret it. She told me once, months later, I thought setting a boundary would ruin everything, but the only thing it ruined was the version of me that didn't exist anyway. The version Catherine had built. The compliant one. The one who smiled and nodded and let other people write the story. That version didn't survive the wedding. The real Sarah did. Here's what I want you to think about. If someone contributes money to your wedding, do they earn a vote on your identity, on your family's visibility, on which parts of you get erased to make room for their vision? Because that's what this was really about. Not centerpieces, not seating charts, not even Catherine. It was about whether Sarah was allowed to exist fully in her own life. And for 6 months, the answer was no, until it wasn't. I think about that moment a lot. The one where Sarah sat in her apartment, looking at a spreadsheet that labeled her family non-essential, and decided she wasn't going to live inside someone else's logic anymore. That moment didn't make the wedding album. It didn't get photographed or toasted or remembered by anyone except Sarah. But it was the most important moment of the entire event. Because that's when she stopped disappearing. Weddings reveal everything. the power, the priorities, the people who think love means control, and the people who finally learn to say no. Sarah's wedding revealed all of it. And in the end, the guest list looked exactly the way it should have from the beginning. With her father in the third row, where she could see him. So I'll ask you this: at what point does help become erasure? At what point does generosity become leverage? And how long are you willing to stay invisible before you rewrite the seating chart yourself?